What if Dr. Doom arrived in DC? The fires of Karnak burned low that night, as they always did after the storms, and the city of Shiruta wore its scars the way old empires wear their history, without apology, without concealment. The minarets stood against a sky the color of hammered bronze, their ancient stones cut from quarries that had not existed since the age of pharaohs, and the streets below were quiet in the particular way that streets grow quiet when the man who rules them is known to walk them alone after dark. Sentries did not follow Black Adam on his evening rounds. They had learned not to. It was the scribe Hamid al-Basir who noticed it first. He was working late in the cartographic annex of the Royal Archive, transcribing survey maps of the Eastern Territories, when the night sky through his narrow window went the color of cold iron and then, for 3 full seconds, simply ceased to exist. Not darkness, not cloud cover, cessation, as though whatever process produced night had been briefly interrupted by something with a higher priority claim on reality. He pressed his face to the glass and saw the plateau east of the city, half a kilometer beyond the outer wall, erupting with light that was neither fire nor lightning, but something between the two, something with intelligence in it, something that arrived in a single violent instant, and then settled like a stone dropped into still water, sending concentric rings of distorted air racing outward across the plateau until they broke against the old walls, and the walls shivered. Hamid reached for the emergency vox on his desk. He had served the archive for 19 years. He had been through 3 attempted coups and 1 actual bombardment. His hands did not shake. He reported the incident in the flat, precise language of a man who understood that his king would be listening and that his king had no patience for hysteria. Black Adam was already in the air. He had felt it the moment it happened, not in his instruments, not in any report, but in the lightning. The power of Shazam lived in him like a second nervous system, older than the name he wore, and that ancient electricity knew when something foreign had arrived in the space it called home. The feeling was not threat, not yet. It was more fundamental than threat. It was the sensation of an assumption being violated. Karnak's sky belonged to no one but its king, and something had just disagreed. He landed on the plateau in a sound like a thunderclap and stood in the settling dust with his cape moving in the displaced air and his golden lightning bolt catching what little light remained. The crater was shallow and roughly circular, perhaps 12 meters across, its edges not blasted outward but pressed down, as though the impact had arrived not from above but from elsewhere entirely, from a direction that did not correspond to any spatial axis the plateau recognized. At its center, rising from one knee with the particular deliberateness of a man who moves slowly, not because he cannot move quickly, but because he refuses to appear rushed, was a figure in armor the color of dead stars. The armor was extraordinary. Black Adam had seen power suits. He had fought men and women wrapped in technology, sophisticated enough to challenge the laws of physics. He had never seen anything like this. The metal itself seemed to be several materials simultaneously, structural alloy and mystical conduit and something else, something that made the lightning in his blood murmur with recognition, as if the armor had been forged in a tradition old enough to predate the need for names. The green cloak was tattered at one edge from whatever transit had delivered its wearer here, and the mask was the face of a man who had decided to stop being a man and had chosen instead to be a declaration. The armored figure rose to full height. He was not as tall as Black Adam expected. He did not need to be. "Karnak," said the voice from behind the iron mask, and it was not a question or an observation. It was something closer to a cataloguing, a filing away. Pre-modern architecture with post-modern political arrangements. Sovereign state with recognized international standing but non-standard governance model. A pause. Ruled by a metahuman with divine power classification. Tetherdam. Known commodity. Black Adam folded his arms across his chest. When he spoke, his voice had the weight of 5,000 years in it. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you are in my country, before I determine the explanation myself." "Victor von Doom," said the figure, "monarch of Latveria. I appear to have traveled somewhat further than intended." The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. In those 3 seconds, Black Adam recalculated, not because the name meant anything to him in this context. He had no files on Latveria, no intelligence reports on any Von Doom, but because the manner in which the name was delivered carried information more useful than any file. There was no fear in it, no performance of strength designed to cover fear. There was only the confidence of a man who had been surprised and had decided that being surprised was simply the most recent data point in an ongoing experiment. "You are not of this world," Black Adam said. "No," said Doom, "I am not." Another silence, shorter. "Then you had better come inside," said Black Adam, "and explain." He did not say it warmly. He did not say it hostilely. He said it the way one absolute authority addresses another in neutral territory, which was to say with the tone of a man who has decided to gather information before rendering judgment, and who expects the other party to understand exactly that much and nothing more. Doom understood. He had expected threat or reflexive hospitality designed to disarm, or performative displays of power meant to establish dominance before negotiation began. He had received none of those things. What he had received was directness, and it recalibrated his initial threat assessment by several degrees. He followed the armored king through the night air, armor thrusters engaging smoothly, systems running diagnostic cycles, and the city of Shiruta spread below them, ancient and unapologetic, and utterly unconcerned with what the rest of the world thought of it. Doom recognized something in it that he had spent 30 years trying to build in Latveria. He found the recognition uncomfortable. The palace of Shiruta's eastern receiving chamber had been built to intimidate visitors who arrived by air, and it succeeded. The ceiling vaulted 40 feet overhead, its stones carved with hieroglyphics that were not decorative but historical, accounts of battles and judgments, and the names of those who had been found worthy and those who had not. The furniture was sparse, deliberate, a table long enough for a war council, 2 chairs that were not quite thrones and not quite less than thrones. Black Adam sat in one of them with the ease of a man sitting in the only chair that had ever mattered. Doom sat in the other. For perhaps 4 minutes, neither of them spoke. This was not standoff. This was assessment, and both of them knew it. It was Doom who broke the silence, because he had learned what he needed, and there was no further strategic benefit to delay. "Your world is wrong," he said. Black Adam's expression did not change. "Elaborate." "The fundamental constants of this reality do not correspond to any multiverse configuration I have previously mapped." Doom's gauntleted fingers moved slightly, pulling invisible data from the air, where his armor's sensors were already translating the ambient environment into comprehensible metrics. "The magical resonance frequency is approximately 12% higher than the maximum recorded value in any variant of my home reality. The cosmic background radiation carries information theoretic signatures consistent with deliberate design rather than stochastic emergence." A pause that carried weight. "Someone built this universe, and they left their fingerprints on the physics." Black Adam was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, he said, "The presence. You have a name for it. We have many names for it." There was something in Adam's voice that was not reverence and was not contempt. It was the complicated register of a man who had dealt with divine authority long enough to have opinions about it. "What you are sensing is real. This reality was created. Its creator is still present, in some form, and there are agents of that creator who enforce certain structural laws of the universe." He looked at Doom directly. "You appear to have arrived in a reality that is more actively administered than your own." "Administered," Doom repeated, and the word came out the way a man expels something he has bitten into, before realizing it was wrong. "You use that word as though it is neutral. I use it as though it is accurate." Doom stood, not impatiently, with the measured energy of a man processing an implication that offended him on a level that required physical expression. He moved to the chamber's tall window and looked out over Shiruta, and his armor's systems mapped the skyline with quiet efficiency, and somewhere in the architecture of his mind, a dozen contingency frameworks began constructing themselves simultaneously. "Tell me," he said, "about the heroes." Black Adam told him. He told it without editorial and without omission, which was more respect than most would have received. The League's membership, their capabilities, their politics, their fracture lines. He told Doom about Superman, about the Kryptonian's power curve and his moral architecture, the way he had chosen restraint as his defining principle, not from weakness, but from a terrifying recognition of what he could do without it. He told him about the Amazonian princess and her connection to the old Greek pantheon, about the Green Lantern Corps and the mathematics of willpower as energy, about the speedster and what it meant to have a man who could think at the speed of physics. And he told him about the Batman. He saved Batman for last, Doom noticed. The one with no powers, Doom said. The one with no powers, Adam confirmed, who nonetheless has contingency plans for every member of that league, including me, including himself. Doom turned from the window. How thorough. Thorough enough that when Superman discovered the files, it nearly destroyed the League. Adam's expression was unreadable. Thorough enough that the Batman did not apologize for them. He simply pointed out that they had never been used. Doom was quiet for 3 full seconds. This, for Victor Von Doom, was a long time. He understands something his colleagues do not, Doom said. Which is, that power without a plan is simply a different variety of chaos. That the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has already decided what to do when everything goes wrong. Doom returned to his chair. His cape settled around him with the weight of old silk. He and I will be enemies. Naturally, said Adam. You both believe you are the only one in the room who is thinking clearly. The difference, said Doom, is that I am correct. Adam looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that was not quite amusement and not quite respect, but lived in the territory between them. You have perhaps 6 hours before the Justice League receives word of your arrival and dispatches someone to assess you. I can accelerate that timeline if I alert them. I can delay it if I do not. The question I am asking myself is whether you are more useful to Kahndaq as a problem they must deal with, or as a resource they cannot access. The question you should be asking yourself, Doom said, is whether Kahndaq has ever had an ally who was not at some level managing you. The silence this time was different in texture. It had weight. Make your case, said Adam. Doom made his case. He spoke for 40 minutes, and he did not use the word ally once. He spoke instead of structural equivalences, of sovereign authority without external sanction, of the particular dignity of a nation that had refused to apologize for the nature of its leader. He spoke of Latveria not as a place he ruled, but as an argument he had won against the world, and he spoke of Kahndaq in terms that were so precisely complementary that they stopped being flattery and became analysis. He told Adam what he saw in Shiruta's architecture, in its policy structures, in the specific flavor of its international isolation, and what he saw was a man who had built something real in defiance of a world that had decided he should not be permitted to build. He did not say, "We are alike." He said, "You solved the same problem I solved, and you arrived at a similar answer, and that answer has enemies in common." When he finished, Black Adam looked at him for a long moment and then said, "You may remain in Kahndaq while you assess your situation, under my authority. Not under my protection, you don't require protection. Under my authority, which means what you do here is known to me, and what you do here reflects on me. If that is acceptable, we will speak further." "It is acceptable," said Doom. It was the closest to gratitude he would come. The Justice League's emergency coordination channel activated at 0417 Metropolis Standard Time, and the alert that woke them was classified Entity, Extra-Dimensional, Sovereign Classification Uncertain, which was the League's diplomatic language for someone arrived from somewhere else, and we don't know yet whether they're going to try to kill us. Cyborg had flagged the energy signature within 20 minutes of the plateau event. The dimensional transit had left a residue in the electromagnetic spectrum distinctive enough that his systems had categorized it automatically, and the initial report was on 6 screens simultaneously before dawn. Batman received it on a system in the cave that was not connected to any other system anywhere. This was by design. He read the energy signature analysis 3 times. The first time to understand it. The second time to look for what the analysis missed. The third time to construct the profile of whatever had generated it. The profile that emerged was not one he recognized from any existing file, which was more interesting than any file he owned. The transit energy was consistent with machinery rather than natural phenomenon. Machinery of extraordinary sophistication, operating on principles that were neither purely technological nor purely magical, but integrated both in a manner his archives did not document. Whoever had built this device had been doing it for a very long time, and they had been doing it alone, which meant they were either a reclusive genius operating outside any known institutional framework, or they were someone who had decided that institutions were not competent to assist them. Batman found himself, against his better judgment, intrigued. He pulled the satellite image from 12 minutes after impact. The figure on the plateau was small in the frame, green cloak, full armor, iron mask. The body language was unmistakable. This was someone who had just survived a transit that should have been catastrophic, and was already conducting an assessment of their surroundings, not in panic, in inventory. He cross-referenced against every extra-dimensional contact in the League's files. No match. He ran the armor through 17 different visual recognition protocols. No match. He ran the energy signature against every known magical and technological baseline in the database. 1 partial match. Fragmentary. A signal intercepted by a checkmate satellite 3 years prior, tagged as anomalous, and filed without follow-up because checkmate had been busy with other things. A dimensional membrane vibration consistent with someone testing the walls between worlds from the other side. The location of the signal's origin, extrapolated from the membrane vibration's angle of incidence, placed it in a reality adjacent to, but distinct from their own. Someone had been knocking on the door for 3 years. Tonight they had come through it. Batman had his full dossier on the unknown entity, completed by the time he entered the League's coordination chamber at 06. It contained 107 pages. The last page was a single sentence. The sentence read, "Assume intelligence and preparation equivalent to our own. Assume that whatever this individual is, they have already assessed us. Doom had already assessed them." He had spent the first 3 hours after Adam's departure not sleeping, which he did not require much of, but working in the guest chamber he had been given, which was the finest room in the palace's east wing, and which contained, at his request, no decorative elements designed to establish mood. Bare stone walls, a table, adequate lighting. He required nothing more. His armor's sensors were already mapping the city's infrastructure, the planet's electromagnetic field, the magical resonance grid that ran through this reality like a second nervous system underlying the first. What he found was extraordinary and disturbing in equal measure. The magical infrastructure of this universe was not distributed. In his home reality, magic was diffuse, arising from the emotional and spiritual dimension of human consciousness, anchored at certain nexus points, but fundamentally wild, fundamentally ungoverned, open to any practitioner skilled enough to learn its grammar. What he was detecting here was different. The magical frequencies of this reality were not merely present, they were organized, structured. The resonance grid had nodes and pathways, and most disturbing of all, a hierarchy. Power flowed downward through the structure, from sources of immense scale to smaller ones, and the sources of immense scale were not human. He tracked 3 dominant nodes. The first was diffuse, everywhere and nowhere, immense enough that his sensors could not establish an outer boundary. This was the presence, or whatever name this reality used for its first cause. The second node was mobile, moving through the upper atmosphere of the planet at several thousand kilometers per hour, on a path that suggested patrol, not transit. Power signature, consistent with an avatar of divine judgment, the Spectre. He filed it under direct threat. Do not engage without preparation. The third node was different in character from the others. It was not diffuse and not patrolling. It was transactional. It had an address. It lived in the space between this world's metaphysical infrastructure and whatever lay beneath it, the underworld, the place where this reality's eschatological plumbing ran, and it was aware of him. He had felt the moment of mutual recognition the way a man feels the sensation of being watched. Not threatening, not yet. The presence in the third node was not hostile. It was interested, which was worse. Something in the deep structure of this universe knew he was here, and it was calculating. He noted the third node in his files under Monitor, Priority Alpha. The Justice League arrived over Kahndaq at 14 o'clock local time, 6 of them, because Batman had argued in the coordination chamber that the full League would read as an invasion force and Adam would take personal offense, and an offended Black Adam in his own territory was a variable that served no one, so 6. Superman and Wonder Woman for presence. Green Lantern John Stewart for communication and field assessment. The Flash for extraction capability if necessary. Cyborg for technical analysis. And Batman because Batman was always in the room when decisions were made. Doom was already on the palace roof when they descended. He had known they were coming for 40 minutes, and he had chosen to wait on the roof rather than in the receiving chamber, because the receiving chamber was Adam's space, and the roof was ambiguous, and in ambiguous space, the first person to establish a position owns the ground. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, and watched them land, and catalogued them in the 7 seconds it took for all 6 to find the ground, and what he noticed first was not their power levels, his sensors had those already, but their formation. Wonder Woman and Superman flanked center. Stewart hung back and high. The speedster had placed himself at a position relative to Doom that would minimize his reaction time if Doom moved suddenly. Cyborg's hands were half raised, ready to interface with anything. And the man in the black cape landed last, 10 meters behind the others, in a position that was architecturally inferior, lower elevation, less central, more exposed to wind. He had chosen the worst tactical position on the roof deliberately, so that Doom would notice him. Doom noticed him. Superman stepped forward. His voice was exactly what Doom had expected from the profile. Deep, measured, carrying the weight of a man who has learned that the first words in a negotiation determine the tone for everything that follows. My name is Superman. We represent the Justice League. We're here to learn about you, not to threaten you. If you're in need of assistance finding your way home, we'd like to help with that. You are kind, said Doom, and his tone made the word descriptive rather than complimentary. And you are powerful enough that extending kindness costs you nothing, which somewhat devalues the gesture. No one on the roof moved. The speedster's weight shifted slightly. Wonder Woman spoke, and her voice had edges in it that Superman's lacked, the particular edge of someone accustomed to situations where words were preliminary to violence. We have questions about the dimensional transit that brought you here. The energy signature it left suggests technology that shouldn't be possible. Most of what I build shouldn't be possible, said Doom. I build it anyway. Who are you? Stewart asked from his elevated position, hand ring ready. Victor von Doom, monarch of Latveria. Though you will find no Latveria in your geography, because the country I govern does not exist in your reality. I have arrived here through a malfunction in my own time transit platform. I am working to correct the malfunction, and I require no assistance from any of you. He looked at Superman. What I require is non-interference. We'd need to know more before we could promise that, Superman said. I know, said Doom. That is why I have not asked for your promise. I am stating a preference. A pause. Then, from 10 meters back, from the man in the black cape, a voice that was not loud and did not need to be. Your armor began passive scanning of Kahndaq's infrastructure the moment you landed last night. You have mapped the city's power grid, the palace's defensive systems, the magical resonance frequency of this reality, and at least 3 distinct metaphysical power nodes that exist above the planetary scale. You have been here less than 14 hours. Doom turned to look at him directly. And you spent those 14 hours constructing a file on me that is roughly 90 to 120 pages long, that correctly identifies my power source as a combination of technological, and sorceress disciplines, and that concludes with a single-sentence summary, advising your colleagues to treat me as a peer-level threat. Batman's expression did not change. 107 pages. Then your conclusion paragraph was shorter than I estimated. Impressive restraint. Something shifted in the air on that rooftop. Not in the postures of the people standing on it, those remained steady, but in the quality of attention between two specific points on the roof's surface, the point where Doom stood and the point where Batman stood, and that quality of attention was the kind that exists between two systems that have just finished recognizing each other and are now deciding what to do with the recognition. Doom, Batman said, and he said the name like a statement of fact. You are not here to take anything from us. You are here because you miscalculated, and now you're working to correct it, and you'd rather we not interfere, because interference creates variables you haven't fully modeled yet. That's accurate. Substantially. So we have a choice, Batman continued. We can treat you as a threat, escalate, force a confrontation in Black Adam's country, which Adam will take exception to, and create a crisis that serves none of us. Or we can extend provisional non-interference while you work, in exchange for transparency about what you're working on. You are offering me a transaction, Doom said. I'm offering us both an efficient outcome. Doom looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at Superman. Then he looked back at Batman. Tell your colleagues, he said, that the third metaphysical node I identified this morning is aware of my presence and has been making calculations about me for approximately 11 hours. It is not aligned with your Justice League, and its interest in me is not benign. He let that sit for a moment. When it moves, you will want to know about it before it acts. I will share that information in exchange for non-interference. Superman looked at Batman. Batman's eyes were already on Doom. Agreed, Batman said. Doom returned his gaze to the city below. You are the only one of them worth worrying about, he said, quietly enough that it was ambiguous whether he intended to be heard. Batman heard it. He filed it where he filed everything. Lex Luthor had known about the dimensional transit within 90 seconds of its occurrence, because Lex Luthor had 17 separate monitoring systems observing Kahndaq's airspace and electromagnetic environment at all times. Because Kahndaq was one of the 12 locations on Earth that Luthor considered structurally important to his long-term planning, and because Black Adam was one of 4 individuals on the planet whose activities Luthor tracked with the same intensity that LexCorp's geological division tracked fault lines. You did not ignore fault lines because you found them inconvenient. You monitored them because their movement told you when the ground was about to change. The ground had just changed. He reviewed the energy signature analysis in his private laboratory above the 80th floor of LexCorp Tower, standing in a white shirt with his jacket off and a glass of scotch in his hand that he had not touched in 40 minutes, and he thought about what it meant that something from another reality had arrived in a country governed by one of the 5 people on Earth whose power level placed them outside ordinary human engagement frameworks. He thought about it for precisely 7 minutes. Then he set down the untouched scotch and began making calls. His research team had the energy signature cross-referenced against every known dimensional transit event in their database by morning. By midday, they had a partial theoretical reconstruction of the transit mechanism, enough to understand that it was not magic only and not technology only, but a sophisticated integration of both disciplines, operating at a level that LexCorp's own research division, which was the most advanced private research operation on Earth, could theorize about but not replicate. By the time the Justice League was landing on Black Adam's palace roof, Luthor had a name, Victor Von Doom. He had gotten it from a source he maintained within the Kahndaq government at considerable expense, a source that had transmitted 3 words and then gone silent, which told him the source had been detected and was no longer operational, which told him that Doom's security systems were better than he had anticipated. He found, somewhat against his will, that this elevated his estimate of the man. Luthor did not go to Kahndaq. He was too intelligent for that. He sent instead a message, through a channel so indirect and so carefully deniable that its transmission could not be traced back to him by any forensic method currently available on Earth. and the message contained exactly 12 words. You understand this world's power structure better than its heroes do. So do I. Doom received the message at 22 o'clock that evening. He read it once and set it aside without responding. He would respond when he had finished mapping Luthor's capabilities, his connections, his exposure points, and his genuine versus performed ambitions. This would take him approximately 3 days. He filed Luthor under rival, assess continuously. He returned to his work. The problem of returning home was not as simple as reconstructing the transit platform. The platform itself could be rebuilt. His armor contained sufficient material science capability, and his knowledge of the dimensional mechanics was complete. The problem was power. The transit he had performed had consumed an amount of energy equivalent to the annual output of a small nation's power grid. He had that energy available in his home reality through systems he had spent years constructing. Here, he had his armor's power systems, his own sorcerous disciplines, and access to whatever this reality's ambient magical field could provide. The ambient magical field was powerful. Extraordinarily so, 12% above anything he had previously encountered, as he had told Adam. The problem was that it was not wild, it was structured. Drawing from it without authorization from whatever administered that structure was likely to produce consequences he could not fully predict. He had spent 11 hours mapping those consequences in theoretical terms, and the picture was not encouraging. He needed a source of power that was substantial, ambient, unallocated, and not connected to the administrative hierarchy of this reality's divine infrastructure. What he found, on the evening of his second full day in this reality, was that such a source existed. It was not on Earth. It was in the boundary zone between Earth's dimensional space and what this reality called the underworld, a liminal zone where metaphysical energy collected without being assigned to any specific cosmic authority's portfolio, like rain collecting in an abandoned cistern, available to anyone who knew where to look. He had begun constructing the extraction framework when he felt, for the second time, the sensation of being watched. This time it was not the diffuse, calculating observation of a monitoring intelligence. This time it was presence, specific, located, intentional. Someone had come to him. He turned from his work and found the chamber was no longer empty. The entity that stood at the chamber's far wall was wearing a human form with the same convincing precision that a master tailor wears someone else's suit, perfectly fitted, every detail exact, and yet suggesting constantly that the form beneath the appearance was something quite different. The face was handsome in an antique way. The eyes were amber, and they contained no bottom. He wore a dark suit that should have been ordinary, and was, because of what wore it, exactly the opposite of ordinary. "Dr. Doom," said the entity, with the particular warmth of a man who has been looking forward to this conversation. "I've been hoping to introduce myself. My name is Neron." Doom looked at him with the unhurried attention he gave to anything that warranted serious threat assessment. "I know what you are," said Doom, "or rather, I know the category. A sovereign intelligence of the underworld classification. Transactional in nature. The amber eyes are a tell." He folded his hands behind his back. "Whatever you want to offer me, the answer is no." "You haven't heard the offer yet," said Neron pleasantly. "The offer involves something I want in exchange for something I consider non-negotiable. All your offers do. You are a demon of a particular type, the type that specializes in identifying what a person wants most, and then finding the specific price they are least willing to pay." Doom's voice was precise and entirely unimpressed. "You have identified that I want to return home. The price you intend to name will involve some form of subjection to an authority above my own." Neron tilted his head. Something moved behind the amber eyes that was not quite respect, but was adjacent to it. "You're more prepared for this conversation than most." "I am more prepared for every conversation than most." Neron moved to the chamber's center. He moved the way things move, when they don't actually need to move, but have learned that movement communicates to humans. "Then let me be direct, since you value directness. You've found the liminal reservoir. You're planning to draw power from it for your return transit. What you don't know, because no one from your reality would know it, is that the liminal reservoir is not actually unallocated. It was allocated a very long time ago to a specific purpose that no longer needs it. It's been sitting there, accruing interest, so to speak, and the entity that last held the allocation is me. Doom was silent for a moment. You are telling me that the power source I have selected is yours. I'm telling you that it has my signature on it, which is meaningfully different from being mine in the ownership sense, and that I am prepared to allow you to access it freely, with full power sufficient for your return, in exchange for a very small acknowledgement. Define acknowledgement. Neron smiled. Simply that, in using the reservoir, you are using it with my permission, a statement of fact, nothing more. You would not owe me anything. You would not be bound by anything. You would simply have acknowledged, once, that in this specific instance, you operated within a structure that included an authority above your own. The chamber was very quiet. Doom looked at the entity with the amber eyes and the bottomless smile, and he understood exactly what was being offered. Not a trap with teeth showing, a trap with no visible teeth at all. The most dangerous kind. He was being asked to say something true, that he had used something belonging to another, and the use of that truth was the mechanism by which something inside him would change, or rather, by which Neron would claim to have changed it, and by which, in this universe's administrative hierarchy, something would be recorded as having changed. He had dealt with demons before. He knew what a consent mechanism looked like. No, he said. Victor, said Neron, and the use of the first name was a small piece of aggression. The alternative is that you find another power source, which this reality does not have available in the quantity you require, which means you remain here, which means this universe's administrative structures will eventually have opinions about that, and those opinions will be enforced by things that make me look like a clerk. I am aware. Then you understand that the practical cost of refusal is significant. I understand that you believe it is. Neron looked at him with the amber eyes, and the ancient patience of something that had been making these offers since before Rome was a village. You would rather remain stranded in a foreign reality than acknowledge a single fact about a power dynamic. I would rather, said Doom, solve the problem correctly, which means finding a power source that does not carry your fingerprints on it, which means I have more work to do, which means this conversation is over. Neron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and the pleasantness in his voice had become something sharper at the edges. You are aware that refusing a Neron transaction does not simply mean you find another solution. It means I have identified you as a resource that is not currently under contract, and entities that manage that category of resource do not simply move on. I know, said Doom. I look forward to it. He turned back to his work. Neron stood in the chamber for 3 more seconds, which was 2 more seconds than he usually stood anywhere, and then he was not standing anywhere because he was simply gone, and the chamber was quiet again, and Doom's hands were already pulling new variables into his calculation framework. He had a problem, and he would solve the problem, and no entity in any universe, administered or otherwise, was going to solve it for him at the price of his autonomy. He had said no to the demon. The spectre noticed. It moved through the upper atmosphere of the planet at altitudes above commercial air traffic, above weather systems, above the reflective scatter of city light, in the space where Earth's gravity was still strong enough to hold you, but the sky was dark enough to see the stars clearly. It had been doing this for a very long time, long enough that the word time had become somewhat theoretical from its perspective. The spectre was the wrath of God in the form of an immense human figure, wrapped in a white cloak that moved in no wind, and it had observed the arrival of Victor von Doom with the attention of something that classifies every new element in the physical universe as either relevant to its mandate or not. Doom was relevant to its mandate, not immediately, not yet, but the calculations were not favorable. The dimensional transit had introduced into this reality a consciousness of extraordinary discipline and ambition, attached to a body containing both technological and sorcerous power of significant scale, and that consciousness had already done 3 things in 40 hours that the spectre had noted and was continuing to note. It had refused the accommodation of the world's existing power structures, specifically the Justice League. It had refused the transactional structures of the underworld, specifically Neron's offer. And it was actively mapping the metaphysical infrastructure of a reality it had not been invited into, with an apparent intention of identifying and exploiting whatever elements of that infrastructure were available to it. The Spectre had seen ambition on this scale before. It had not always ended cleanly, but the Presence's mandate was not preemptive enforcement. The Spectre acted on what was done, not on what might be done, and what had been done so far was arrive, assess, and refuse to be recruited by the wrong parties. None of those things triggered its mandate. It continued its patrol and filed doom in the category it reserved for things that required ongoing observation, watch, threshold not yet crossed. It gave the threshold 1 week before it was crossed. Doom gave it 4 days. The solution arrived not in a moment of inspiration, but in the specific methodical way that all of Doom's solutions arrived, through the elimination of every inferior option until only the correct one remained. He had rejected Neron's power source. He had assessed every other metaphysical energy reservoir in the planet's immediate dimensional neighborhood and found each of them allocated, structured, and administratively inaccessible without drawing attention he did not want. The technological options available in this reality were substantial but not sufficient for dimensional transit at the scale he required. What remained was his own capacity. Not the armor's power systems, those were substantial but bounded, his sorcerous capacity, which in his home reality he had spent 30 years expanding to the point where it placed him in the top tier of human practitioners alive. The question was whether those same disciplines, applied in a reality with a 12% higher magical resonance, would translate at a corresponding scale. The mathematics said they would. They said they would produce enough power for transit if he performed the extraction ritual at the right node, at the right resonance frequency, while maintaining sufficient shielding against the administrative hierarchy's attention. It was like generating your own electricity in a country with a state power monopoly, not illegal if done quietly enough. The additional complication was that performing the ritual at sufficient scale would take time. Approximately 6 hours of sustained sorcerous working at full intensity. During those 6 hours he would be generating a magical signature substantial enough to register on every sensor in a 500-kilometer radius, including whatever the Justice League was running and whatever Luthor's monitoring infrastructure was watching for. He needed 6 uninterrupted hours. He told Black Adam, not because he owed Adam the information, but because the working would be performed in Kandak, and Adam would be aware of it regardless, and it was better to have Adam aware and not hostile than aware and uncertain. Adam listened to the explanation with the particular attention of a man who has seen a great deal of sorcery in 5,000 years of life, and who therefore does not confuse impressiveness with competence. 6 hours, he said, with a signature that radius. Yes. The League will come. I expect so. Do you want them not to? Doom considered this for a moment. I want the first 4 hours of non-interference. After that they can do as they choose. The ritual will be too far advanced to interrupt safely by then. Adam looked at him. You are asking me to hold the Justice League at arm's length for 4 hours. I am telling you what I require. Whether you choose to provide it is your decision. Adam stood. I will hold them for 3 hours, in exchange for one thing. Doom waited. When you reach your reality, Adam said, tell them that Kandak exists, not as a state to be monitored or a problem to be managed, as a sovereign nation with a head of state who has been to the edge of things and come back, and who makes his own alliances on his own terms. Doom looked at him for a long moment. Done, he said, and in his mouth that word was a contract. He began the ritual at dawn. He had chosen the plateau east of the city, his original arrival point, partly because the dimensional membrane there was already stressed from his transit in and would require less energy to stress again, and partly because the open ground provided the spatial awareness his working required. He stood at the center of the crater from his arrival and began building the sorcerous architecture with the same deliberate precision he brought to everything, layer by layer, each component tested before the next was added, the entire structure growing upward and outward from his hands, in patterns that were not visible to the unaugmented eye, but were legible as light to anything with the sensitivity to see them. Luther saw them on a satellite feed within 12 minutes. He watched from his laboratory, this time with the scotch properly in hand, and he felt the complex, specific feeling he always felt when encountering something that was genuinely beyond his current ability to replicate. It was not admiration. It was closer to the feeling a chess grandmaster has when they encounter a position they have not seen before. Profound interest and immediate tactical assessment and, underneath both, the unmistakable appetite of someone who intends to possess this thing eventually. He was already calculating how. The Justice League was over Kandak at 90 minutes, 6 of them again, the same 6, approaching from the west, and they found Black Adam waiting in the sky above the plateau, arms crossed, cape moving in the high-altitude wind, his expression the expression of a king who has decided something and is not in a mood to discuss the decision. Superman stopped 6 meters from him. The others fanned out in the formation that was neither threatening nor submissive. Batman hung back. He was watching the ritual below, not Adam. Adam, Superman said, with the weight of a history between them in that single word. What is he doing? Leaving, said Adam. He requires 2 more hours. When it is done, he will be gone from this reality entirely, and whatever concern you have about him will be resolved permanently. Whatever he's doing down there is generating a magical signature large enough that the Spectre has moved to a lower orbital position, Wonder Woman said. We need to know what exactly the working involves. I will tell you, said Adam, that it involves no bargain with any entity of this reality, no soul transfer, no cosmological contract, no extraction of power that belongs to anyone in this universe. It is as clean as dimensional sorcery at this scale can be. I have watched it for 90 minutes. I know what I am looking at. Batman had still not looked up from the plateau. He identified Neron's interest in him the night he arrived, he said, quietly. And he refused it. Everyone looked at him. I've had systems monitoring Kandak's metaphysical traffic since we left. Neron visited. Doom sent him away. In 11 words. Batman's eyes finally moved up. He's not a threat to this reality. He's a man who wants to go home and will not be bought. He could still, Superman began. He could still do a lot of things, Batman said. So could you, so could I. Capability is not intent. He looked at Adam. 2 hours. Adam looked at Superman. Superman looked at the plateau below, where the light of Doom's working was growing, and the air was beginning to hum with frequencies that existed below the threshold of hearing, but registered in the chest as weight, and he thought about the man who had arrived unasked and refused to be recruited by the wrong powers, and been rude to everyone without being dishonest to anyone, and he thought about what kind of man turns down a demon's offer. 2 hours, he said. Luthor's final gambit arrived in hour 4, because of course it did. Because Luthor had spent 3 days calculating the optimal moment to intervene, and he had determined that the optimal moment was when the working was too far advanced to be safely interrupted, but not yet complete, when Doom would be committed, but not yet free, when the leverage was maximum. He arrived not in person but in projection, a holographic image transmitted to a device that he had arranged to be placed in the palace's cartographic annex by the same asset who had given him Doom's name and who was now compromised, but not yet detained, and Doom's armor detected the projection in the palace and routed the transmission to his helmet display without interrupting the rhythm of his hands. Luthor's face in the helmet display was exactly as Doom had calculated it would be, intelligent, controlled, performing ease while conducting assessment. Dr. Doom, said Luthor, I have 2 things to offer you, and approximately 90 seconds before your working reaches the point where this conversation becomes irrelevant. The first is that I've spent 3 days mapping the dimensional exit point your working is constructing, and I believe I can make it somewhat more stable and precise than it will be if you complete it unassisted, which will translate to a more accurate arrival at your intended destination. The second is that I know you've been analyzing me the same way I've been analyzing you. Peer recognizing peer, you know I'm telling the truth about the first offer. Doom's hands did not stop moving, the patterns continued building. And the price, he said. Information, said Luther, about your reality, specifically about what lies beyond its borders. You've mapped the multiverse's outer boundaries. That knowledge, even a fraction of it, would be the single most valuable piece of intelligence in human history. Doom looked at Luthor's face in the projection for 4 full seconds. Your first offer is genuine, he said. The stabilization calculation is real, and it would improve my exit trajectory. You are correct about that. Your second offer is structured so that accepting the first creates a perceived obligation to the second that you intend to press. Luther said nothing. His expression did not change. The answer to both, said Doom, is no. Not because I object to your ambition. I recognize your ambition and consider it coherent, if ultimately overextended. But because a man who would share the outer boundaries of reality with someone he has known for 4 days and has no reason to trust is not a man whose knowledge of those boundaries has any value. A pause. You would have answered the same way, Doom said. You know it. Luthor looked at him for a moment, and something moved behind his eyes that was not admiration and was not frustration, but contained elements of both. And then he said, "Safe travels, Dr. Doom," and the projection ended. Doom finished the working. The 6th hour arrived, and the energy architecture above the plateau was visible now even to unaugmented human eyes, a column of structured light 60 meters across and extending upward until it disappeared into a sky that had changed color around it. The blue of Kandak's afternoon became something deeper and stranger, a shade that existed between blue and the color of deep space, and something that had no name, because it only appeared when the boundary between realities was thin. The sounds coming from the column were not loud, but they were everywhere simultaneously, below hearing and above it at the same time, felt in the teeth and in the sternum and in the oldest parts of the brain that did not have language for what they were detecting. Black Adam stood 100 meters from the column's edge and felt the lightning in his blood singing, not in alarm, in something closer to recognition. The power being worked here was immense and clean, and it had the quality of something built rather than borrowed, and Adam had enough centuries behind him to know the difference between a man exercising power and a man channeling it, and what Doom was doing was exercise in the purest sense, the application of a will so focused and so absolute that the universe around it simply had to accommodate it. He found it, to his considerable surprise, beautiful. Doom stepped into the column. The armor's systems were at full output, every circuit running at maximum, the mystical disciplines and the technological disciplines in the perfect integrated harmony that he had spent 30 years learning to achieve. The dimensional membrane ahead of him was visible now as a surface, not a metaphor, a literal surface that existed in space the way water surfaces existed, reflective and tensioned, and capable of being broken if approached correctly. He had broken membranes before, not from this side, not into this particular angle of the multiverse, but the principle was the same. He hit the membrane at full power. It resisted. This was expected. Every membrane resisted. The question was whether you had enough to push through. He had enough. The membrane broke around him like light through a prism, splitting into 1,000 colors that didn't exist, filling the sky above Kandak with an aurora that would be visible for 400 kilometers in every direction, and would be photographed and recorded and studied and argued about in scientific papers for the next 20 years. And through the breaking membrane, Doom felt the shift of realities, the specific vertiginous sensation of moving between cosmological structures, the moment between one set of physical laws and another where everything is simultaneously possible. And then the shift resolved, and the colors collapsed, and the air around him was cold and smelled of Latverian pine, and the castle on the hill had lights in its towers. He was home. He landed on the castle's south battlement, and stood for a moment in the cold air and looked out at the mountain valley below, at the lights of the city he had built in a nation that the world had tried to take from him, and he thought about the administered universe he had just left, its gods and their fingerprints on the physics, its heroes with their provisional tolerance of sovereignty they didn't approve of, its demon with the amber eyes and the patient offers, its brilliant and overextended billionaire with his 3-day calculations, and its 2 kings, one of whom had held 6 of the world's most powerful beings at arm's length for 3 hours, as a matter of courtesy. He thought about the Batman, who had built a 107-page dossier on a man he had never met, who had chosen the worst tactical position on the roof to announce that he was the one paying attention, who had said, "Capability is not intent," and meant it in a specific way that only someone who had thought very hard about capability would mean it, and who was, in the end, the only person in that reality Doom had spoken to honestly. He would monitor that reality, he would build a probe, discreet and shielded against detection, and he would watch the administered universe and its Justice League, and its 2 kings, and its demon, with the patient offers, not with any immediate intention, with the attention of a man who had been somewhere extraordinary and who did not intend to be surprised by it again. He turned from the battlement and walked inside. Behind him, in the cold air, the aurora he had made still burned. In the city of Shiruta, in the cartographic annex of the Royal Archive, Hamid al-Basir sat at his desk and looked at the eastern sky through his narrow window, where the aurora was still fading, still throwing cold light across the ancient stones of the minarets and the old walls and the streets that had been built for kings who did not apologize. He had his recording device in his hand because he was a scribe, and scribes recorded things, and he had the particular feeling that what he was looking at was the kind of thing that should be recorded. He thought for a long time about how to begin. He wrote, finally, "In the 40th year of the Reconstruction, a man came from elsewhere and went away. He came armored and went armored, and while he was here, he refused 3 different offers of power that was not his own, and solved his problem with power that was. He spoke to our king as one sovereign to another, and our king extended him 3 hours and called it courtesy. The lights he made when he left are still visible from the archive window as I write this." He set the pen down and looked at the sky. On the other side of a broken membrane that had already healed itself, in the administered universe with the divine fingerprints on its physics, the Spectre completed its orbital sweep and moved the file for Victor Von Doom from watch to former presence, departed, and returned its attention to the 10,000 ongoing matters that constituted the management of a created cosmos. The presence, as always, was aware of all of it and said nothing. The Guardians of the Universe filed their report on the dimensional transit event and classified it isolated incident, no subsequent action required. Neron sat in the space between the world's metaphysical infrastructure and the deep places beneath it, and turned the amber eyes toward the healed membrane, and made a note in a ledger that no human hand had ever touched. The note read simply, "Doom V. Refuses contracts. Integrity confirmed. Reassess when opportunity allows." Batman erased his 107-page file on Victor Von Doom and started a new one. The new file was 312 pages long because the old one had been constructed without complete information, and he did not tolerate incomplete information. The new one began with an assessment of the dimensional transit mechanism. It ended with a 12-point contingency framework for the event of a second visit. He expected a second visit. He was preparing. Somewhere in the vast administrative structure of a reality that had been built by something immense, and was maintained by something immense, and was moving towards something immense, a man with amber eyes and a bottomless smile was also preparing, and the nature of preparation was the same as the nature of power: patient, 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 and then absolute. In Latveria, in a castle on a cold mountain in the country he had built from silence and iron and the refusal to be told what was possible, Victor Von Doom sat down to work. Not to plan his return to the administered universe, not yet, not with any specific timeline, but to understand it more completely. He had been there for 4 days. He had gathered data sufficient to build a model. He would build the model, and he would find in the model what he had not been able to see from inside the situation. And when he understood the administered universe well enough to feel the edges of what it thought were its own limitations, he would decide what, if anything, to do about it. He had said no to a demon. He had held his own against 6 of the most powerful beings in a foreign reality. He had solved the problem correctly, with power that was his. Not borrowed, not bought, not administered. His. The work lamp burned in the castle study, and the mountains stood in the dark around it, and the sky above them was clear enough to see the stars, and the stars above Latveria had no fingerprints on them. No divine administrator had left a mark on their physics. They were simply there in the old and indifferent way that stars were there before anyone thought to believe in them, and doom worked beneath them in the cold silence of a free country, and felt, as he always felt when the work was going well, the closest thing to peace that a man like him could recognize. It was not enough, it never was, but it was his. And in the grim administered darkness of a universe written by the hand of a god, and policed by the wrath of that same god, and threaded through with the contracts of demons, and the good intentions of heroes who had not yet decided whether sovereignty was a virtue or a threat, the memory of a man in iron had already become the kind of story that worlds tell themselves, when they need to remember that there are, occasionally, forces that cannot be bought, cannot be administered, and cannot be made to say yes. The aurora faded, the stones of Shiruta cooled, the file in a Batcave grew to 312 pages, and Dr. Doom, alone in his castle, alone in his country, alone in his certainty, turned the next page and kept working.